Let me first welcome you all on behalf of GIDS, our faculty, staff, my board of governors, and on my own behalf. I welcome you all to this sixth GIDS Golden Jubilee lecture series, which we started in August last year. And today we have the sixth lecture in the series. GIRI Institute is celebrating its Golden Jubilee. And very recently, we have organized our 106th annual international conference of the Indian Economic Association in GIRI Institute. We had almost 250 delegates coming from different parts of the country, as well as there was international presence. And within, I think, 10 days, we are holding this lecture series today. We have the Golden Jubilee lecture series, which we plan to bring out in a book form later, when we will be concluding the Golden Jubilee in the month of August this year. So I welcome you all to this Golden Jubilee series. Today's lecture is very prestigious. We are having the lecture on the politics of climate change, time for a reset, by Satish Chandra Mishra ji. I'll just introduce the speaker for all of you. Shri Satish Chandra Mishra ji is an Oxford and Cambridge trained, internationally acknowledged economist and strategic thinker who is currently the chair of the Strategic Asia Institute in Bali. Shri Satish ji is also Managing Director of Strategic Asia Indonesia and Director of Strategic Asia Global, a political economic consulting firm with extensive expertise of China, Indonesia, and India. He has an impressive research and policy track record, complemented by his high-profile presence in the Indonesia print and digital media, as well as in policy and public dialogue circles throughout the Indonesia archipelago. Shri Satish has a formidable track record on securing, managing, and delivering complex development agendas, programs across an impressive range of developed and developing countries. He has worked with many development agencies as well as advising a number of governments and private corporations on a range of geopolitical and economic challenges in Asia. He has headed OECD's outreach and extension into Central and Eastern Europe. He has been working in various countries. He has brought 2 decades of field experience in India, Southeast Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe. With the establishment of Strategic Asia Institute, Shri Satish Chandra continues to work on policy issues in ASEAN, including macroeconomic assessment for Myanmar, Cambodia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Laos. He serves as team leader on several programs intended to turn research into policies such as women's empowerment, financial inclusion, political decentralization, and economic diversification. So he is a multifarious personality who has huge international experience. We are fortunate having you, Satish Chandra ji, for today's lecture. Let me also take the opportunity to just introduce today's chair, Professor Sunil Nautiyal, who hails from ISAC. He has been my colleague at ISAC.
Yeah, sir.
And,
I request.
my younger brother.
Sir, I request to be very, very brief. I am here because we are here to listen the the speakers.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure, but your personality is quite long, so I'll take 2 minutes introducing.
Too long, sir. We are here to listen to the speaker only. To be very honest,
he is the director, DB Pant National Institute of Himalayan Environment, based in Almora, Uttarakhand. Dr. Nautiyal he has been my colleague at CENR, Institute for Social and Economic Change. I was heading Agriculture Division, he was heading Environment Division here. And he is chairing today's lecture on climate change. I think very appropriate personality to chair this lecture. He has been a prolific writer. He has published almost 250 papers in international journals, 14 books, and he is ranked as number 3 in citation in social sciences. So his academic caliber speaks in itself. We have circulated the detailed CV of Professor Sunil. So I'll just skip for saving time for our lecture. And also just taking an opportunity to introducing Professor Venkatesh Datta, the today's discussant. Professor Venkatesh has contributed to significant changes in public discourse, law, and policy for sustainable water resource management in India. He has been Fulbright Scholar, USA, and a British Chevening Fellow, UK. He has done his PhD from Terry and postdoctoral research at University of Maryland, USA. He is known for his work on Gomti, Gagra, and Rapti basins. He has been working for the government of India and government of Uttar Pradesh, and he has contributed very hugely to the academics as well as policy making. I think we have the very befitting chair and the discussant for today's lecture. And Satish ji, I think on the climate change, state policy, these are the all very, very burning issue. We have been seeing climate change, how it's impacting. When it is summer, sometimes it's too deep summer. Sometimes summer is escaped during the period when it used to be. It is preponed or postponed, which affects the rain pattern. I come from agriculture economics. I know what is the importance of rainfall. It is impacting our farmers' living being as well. There are people from all across the life, they are getting affected. Now we can see in Europe at times they have to search for hotel because it becomes too hot, which they have never seen. Similarly, the December month, which is used to be so cold, this year we did not have any cold in December. The entire December has passed. Even Himalaya is looking for snowfall. Himachal Pradesh has not got the snowfall. This is all climate change. I think we have the very appropriate time to discuss what should be the state policy, what should be the response, how we should cope the climate change which is impacting our lives, and in the coming times we are going to suffer much more. So how this suffering can be reduced, what should be the state policy? I think this is a very, very appropriate topic to speak on. So without taking much time, I now hand over the dais to Chandraji, please, Satish Chandra Mishra ji. Please carry on the further your speech on this, and in the end we will have our my colleague who will be giving a vote of thanks. But before Mishra ji take over, I request Sunil Notia to chair the lecture and take the proceedings forward. Over to you, Sunil ji.
Thank you, Professor Pramod Kumar, for giving me this opportunity, and namaste to all of you. It's a very interesting topic to be discussed thoroughly within the fraternity of academics and other stakeholders. The title itself is a very, very interesting and very contemporary, and this need to be debated thoroughly. The politics of climate change: time for a reset. Very interesting title topic for the speech today by our distinguished speaker. And one thing I would like to mention, that this was really not discussed before in great detail as it should have been discussed. So I gone through the abstracts. It's very catchy, and I'm sure that Professor Pramod Kumar, you will be able to receive the full length paper from the honorable speaker, so that you can publish the article in in the form of popular article series or in the form of a chapter from your book, which would be coming from some international reputed publisher, so and so forth. So I will not take much time. I'm here to listen to the speaker and also to learn something very, very interesting, very new from this today's lecture. And I'm equally overwhelmed to see that discussant of today's lecture is my dear friend, Professor Venkatesh Chatta, a young professor from Central University of Lucknow, who has been working on this issue and covering wide spectrum which are to be dealt with the equal rigor and vigor under the discussion of climate change and climate uncertainty. So good to see that discussant of the lecture is the person who has done enormous work in this field of research. And I welcome you all to this lecture, all fraternity from GIDS and other institutions attending this lecture today. And now I request Professor Misra to begin with your lecture, sir. We are eagerly waiting to listen to you. Yeah, for last couple of days. Thank you so very much. Over to you, Professor Misra.
Everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yes. Go ahead, Mishra.
Well, this is a little bit of like homecoming for me because I spent a couple of months at the GRI Institute when T.S. Popola was here. That was in the mid-70s. And now to see this glorious expansion and the reputation that this institute has, it really makes me very happy because I was here right at the beginning, almost 25 years ago, and now you're celebrating your silver jubilee. So congratulations and
Golden Jubilee, sir.
Golden Jubilee. Sorry. I have to double that in a way. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm very honored. I'm also a little nervous because there are so many people who know about the nuts and bolts of climate change much more than I could ever hope to. So you have to take today's talk from, in a way, a user of the information that you all generate and trying to see what it means for policy making. Because that is the area I've been involved with for a very long time. My work has taken me one way or the other to close to 40 countries in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, and many of their supporting countries, like in the OECD, I was running Russia and Eastern Europe. And so if you were working on Estonia, in fact, you were working with Estonia plus the Nordic countries. So I'm used to being a user of very complicated data and a lot of supporting interests and often conflicting interests. So it's from that background and viewpoint that I come today. And in a way, the topic was foisted onto me by a friend who said, well, you must write just one article on climate change. And that is really trying to understand the science. And so this is the second piece in a series of three. The first one I've already sent to Dr. Parmod, but I will also circulate both the PowerPoint as well as the main article. It's currently being finally edited, but the main gist of it I'll present here. I deliberately didn't present a PowerPoint because then everybody spends all their time looking at the numbers and we often miss the message. So since this will be available to you, please forgive me for not following line by line the argument that is in the paper. You will have that. Now, why did I look at this whole issue of politics and economics of climate action? And I'm particularly talking about the politics, if you like, of climate action, as opposed to climate change and simply looking at how important the 1.5 degree Celsius target is, or looking at how fast the glaciers are melting, et cetera, because for that, much more specialized people than me to measure and to look at the speed with which global warming and the emission of greenhouse gases is affecting the planet. What I was intrigued at when I started working on this was, first of all, that all the attention was on the science and not so much on what I call the art. That is, in a way, the awareness of climate change, and particularly the effects of greenhouse gases, has already been with us for a very long time. You can even trace it back to about 100 years. But the action is very recent, in a way. And so the first one, which is I'm not presenting here, but as part of the background, is that the science is understood. Most people accept it. Of course, for political reasons, there are climate deniers and all kinds of other things. But in general, it has not been matched by the action. The action has been there again in terms of activism around the globe, etc. But it's very recent compared to the science. So the first paper is looking at converting that science into an art of negotiation, into action, etc., etc. And that's where it ends, saying that there is not too much confusion in the science, but there's a lot of confusion in what we should do and how we should do it, etc. So now I take this forward. And when I started looking at why that is, the first thing that really struck me was the fact that looking at what the philosophical foundation, what is the argument in favor of climate action? What does it really come down to? What are you saying? And it seemed to me that we're saying two things. One is that we are all a common humanity. There's this great picture of the moon, of the Earth from space, the little blue dot, and we say, okay, this is all we've got. And we don't know if there's other intelligent life out there. We may be unique, and this is where we live. And so if that goes, then we're extinct, we're gone. And it's going to be very fast because the speed with which the climate is changing and the Earth is heating up, etc., etc. So the first philosophical point was that we are a common humanity, and so we are facing this great danger, so we should do it together. And in a way, there is that is the great logic. And in a way, the second argument, which is embedded in this about climate action, was that somehow it also creates great injustice. So we start talking about climate justice by saying that some people who had never contributed very much to the emission of greenhouse gases are suffering more than those people who did. And so there are all these arguments about giving financial assistance and other kinds of assistance to countries through no fault of their own are badly impacted by climate change, and they should be helped in all kinds of ways, certainly in terms of coping with the impact of climate change, right? So you have different kinds of mitigation and so on, support for them. And so that's another argument about the unjust impact of climate change. So these two arguments seem to me to be fundamental to the political and philosophical argument about climate action. One, that we are all in it together and we are common humanity. And secondly, that the impact of this is very unjust because people who have, the countries, the populations, the communities that have caused this destruction, if you like, need to pay to others who are victims of it, right? So we come to these two central arguments, philosophical arguments for climate action. And these are arguments which are not difficult to understand because they affect everybody. And also you can have tremendous data. You can see countries which are, cities, and I come from Indonesia. Jakarta is sinking into the sea. That's why they are now moving the capital to somewhere else. Look at the Bangladesh. You don't have to go to all the Pacific Islands and so on who will simply disappear. But even fairly large countries that have major sections of it underwater, and of course many species of animals, of wildlife, etc., which also be destroyed in the process. Through desertification, people's livelihoods are threatened, etc. So we have got all this wonderful data about illustrating the injustice on people, and so in a way, this is a good argument. We can all identify with it. So why, in that context, do I basically talk about time for a reset? And the reason that is the case is when I actually started looking at the philosophical basis, on the one hand, and secondly, the fact that despite this strong argument and its appeal to everybody on the planet, one way or the other, even the richer people who, and richer countries who are now, through carbon trading, etc., are able to buy, in a way, pay for the destruction they're causing by planting trees somewhere else, or in projects which either reduce carbon emission or absorb carbon as sinks, etc. What does it really mean? So my first point I make in the paper is that actually this issue of saying that we have one common humanity is a complete myth. In practice, we don't have a common humanity, partly because we fight wars all the time, and I've given a lot of examples in the paper. Fight wars. We have difference in ethnicity. We have different political systems. So even when you're talking about democracies, no two democracies are the same, And the argument for democracy was that in democracies, you're more open to discussion, civil society can be more active, so the community level mobilization is easier, and so on. So, democracies can give you the starting point, if you like. So I looked at that in the paper also and feel that actually many of these democracies are in decline as we speak. So they have not been the great fountains of climate action. And in fact, many surveys, the Pew Institute, for example, shows that actually the day-to-day concerns of employment and health and so on score much further, much higher than climate action does in the political arena. And we don't have any, really good examples of political parties, for example, which can coalesce around arguments of climate change. So, there's a lot of awareness, but if you look in the political sphere, we don't really get the same degree of support and reflected in public life and in political life. And one of the reasons is that actually we're not that common humanity as climate action activists actually claim. The other argument was, of course, that you're bound, if you're one common humanity, you're bound by a common threat, which is the extinction level threat. Now, the argument again there is that actually a lot of people don't mind dying for a particular cause. It's not that just because you have extinction, a threat of extinction, that you will somehow combine and forget about your differences, etc. Look at the kamikaze fighters at the end of the Second War. These guys deliberately committed suicide by diving onto airplanes, onto ships with their airplanes. You look at jihadists today who deliberately kill themselves and not worried about extinction. So again, the argument that somehow we'll be united by extinction threats also didn't seem to me to be that convincing. And it wasn't convincing for another reason, which is that now we have a whole series of other extinction threats. Apart from the threat of nuclear war, we have all kinds of discussions of the deadly virus We have issues relating to AI, which is very contemporary. We even have issues, if you look at the work by David Sinclair out of Harvard, of creating in the next 20, 25 years, through genetic engineering, a completely new kind of human being. You know, human beings who may live till 200 or 300 years, who have an IQ of maybe 300 or 400. So even what is meant by common humanity is now being questioned, and certainly will be as we move forward. So whichever way you look at it, the argument that we are a common humanity which will be united in face of an existentialist threat, and that is somehow enough to propel us to climate action, didn't seem to me as convincing as it first appears. So that's the one point of the argument that I make here. The second is the whole issue of justice and injustice. Often it stems from the whole notion of inequality. You know, and that's part of the argument which says, well, we have unequal impact on global warming, you know, greenhouse gas emission. And so that's the argument. There are countries which don't emit very much, but are badly affected by it. And so there is inequality in the contribution, in the impact, and so on and so on. So part of the justice argument, the second leg, if you like, of the philosophical argument in favor of climate action is this notion of inequality, and connected to that is the injustice. So we talk about climate justice, for example. Now again, if you look at what that really means, some strange things start happening. The first clearly is the old argument that made by the developing countries that, well, you know, why shouldn't we want to be as advanced as you? You know, after all, we were held down by colonialism. You know, we not because of some fair means, but very unfairly through physical threats and colonial rule, etc., etc. And so now is our time. And then you're telling us, well, reduce your consumption, worry about greenhouse gas emissions, and somehow we'll pay you something to help you do so. So that is itself unjust. You know, so why shouldn't we? So you've got two kinds of arguments here. One is the countries were saying, well, we should grow faster, we should have the same consumption levels that you guys have. And the second saying, well, we didn't cause the massive increase in greenhouse gas emissions, and yet we're being punished for it because we're going to sink into the sea, or we are particular cases of severe climate impact, if you will. Now, the interesting thing about the injustice or the inequality argument is that if you look at the social science literature, what you see is that for the last, in fact, in a way, you can even go back to Greek times, but let's not go back to 2,000 years. But even if you look at the last 200 years, most of the social movements that we are talking about, whether they were Marxist or anarchist or social democratic or whatever, have always had the center the notion of inequality, unfairness, injustice, etc. You know, and that notion of injustice is still debated. You know, the whole issue of capabilities, for example, with Amartya Sen expounded so eloquently. The notion of fairness as a core of justice, like John Rawls and others. The notion of communities as a way in which you can give something back to the community, enable it to provide civic functions, etc. So a whole series of very sophisticated modern day literature exists, which talks about inequality, economic justice, fairness, all these different concepts. Now, the interesting thing is that none of that literature actually is integrated into the climate change work. It's as if climate justice is a new breed of justice, where all it is a kind of unfairness, which is there in the mainstream of social science over the last couple of hundred, in different ways. So one of the proposals I make here is that one of the reasons why the political philosophy, the political ideology issues of climate action is not as strong as it could be, because it's ignoring virtually 2 centuries of philosophical literature as well as political action as to how such movements should be organized, they should be mainstream, etc., etc. And so the argument here is, in order to not be a particular piece of a big jigsaw, like climate justice, you should integrate mainstream, simply call it justice, and then one of the areas in which you see the same unfairness as occurs in the economic field and others is climate change. And that makes it much more mainstream, because it goes into problems on employment and all the rest of it that we know. And we already have very rich literature there. So integrate that. So that brings me the first half of this paper, questioning the philosophical basis and arguing that climate justice is just a subset of a broader issue of fairness, equality, capability raising, etc., which we are all familiar with as social scientists, and we should try to integrate that. And we don't see too much of it. What we see in the climate change literature is to say, well, we are sinking into the ground, please help us, give us some more money. But how is that different to any foreign aid argument? It's exactly the same thing. We have high rates of unemployment, we need to open schools, we can't look after our sick, we don't have infrastructure, etc., etc. We have a lot of famine. Please give us higher amount of foreign aid. It's exactly the same thing, and so we need to be much more sophisticated in the way this is packaged, and ultimately, somehow the apathy in the political circles to climate action, which is exhibited in all these polls, needs to be faced directly and countered. And that is the agenda that you need to have for political action. So that's my second part, which in a way is a bit more technical, is that while all this discussion about the politics of climate change is taking place, there are a number of structural differences in the global landscape, which we also in a way have not integrated very carefully. Let's take the last 20 years even. What are these structural changes? There are structural changes in groups which have the power to decide key elements of climate action agenda. And I just mentioned 3 here. The first is the emergence of megacities. Urbanization now is common in almost everywhere. So much so that the geography of development has become a very powerful subject. And the center of it is a whole nation of connectivity, corridors, etc., interconnecting. And so what that does is that it has created and will continue to create larger and larger cities. And the interesting there is that when cities talk to each other, and some of them, as you will see a bit later, are much bigger than most of the countries that they talk about similar problems. They talk about their infrastructure, they talk about urban housing, they talk about pollution, and they talk about, of course, employment, etc. When countries talk to each other, they often talk about the differences. Their history, their culture, their language, the conflicts they have on tariffs and migration. I mean, look at immigration being such a big issue. So one important question is that if megacities are the moving force, the level at which major decisions are made, what is the point of having 200 odd countries collecting together in massive conferences and everybody is looking at that, but the effective decision is in these mega cities and so on that's taking place. So maybe we should move away from these global conferences, which are very good at raising awareness, reminding everybody that there is a target out there, what are the consequences and so on. But I argue in the paper that we all know that already, because we've had this, both the science as well as already so many COPs and so on. So we should focus a lot more on connecting the cities, because we often talk about things which are similar. It's much easier for them to reach some kind of consensus, and there are not so many of them. Even if you take the major cities and get them to agree on a number of, and that's already happening, but I'm suggesting that that might be a better focus anyway. And now I have a graph in the, I have several, but one graph is to show that urbanization itself is a result of this dramatic growth we have had literally in the last 40 to 50 years. And if you look at the long-term trend of GDP per capita in the world economy, you'll find that it's almost completely flat till 1800, and then it just sort of does this. And 20 years before now, that curve becomes even steeper and steeper. So it's really a very recent picture. Now, the next graph that I have, which you will see, is to simply ask, what happens if Apple Corporation was a country? How would it rank in the GDP levels of other countries, for example? And I mean, you can take this for Microsoft, you can take this for any of the major enterprises in the world. This is just one example. And you'll find that Apple, with an estimated total turnover of $2.1 trillion, would be bigger than Italy. It would be bigger than Brazil. It would be bigger than Canada, Russia, Korea, Australia, Mexico, and Indonesia. So here we have one comparison where you've got these global corporations, which are not elected, which serve a few shareholders, or a lot of shareholders, but still, much lower than populations. And they are, they have resources which are bigger than what we consider are rich countries. Like Italy is a pretty rich country, and so is Canada, and so on, right? Or massive countries like Brazil and Indonesia. So I think doing these kinds of comparisons is useful to just illustrate what is happening in the global economy in terms of the emergence of new players in the system, right? So this is one example that I've given here. You can take another example. Do the same thing with megacities. If you rank the income of megacities against countries as if they were countries, you'll get the same picture. Because what happens there is that, for example, New York, the total income that New York generates is more than the whole of Canada. And Los Angeles generates more than Australia. London generates more than the Netherlands. And Paris itself more than South Africa. So again, you see the power of the megacities, just like you saw with the big corporations, actually much bigger, not compared to Namibia or to Somalia or to Colombia or wherever. It's actually richer than even some of the richest economies in the world. So this is the second thing. So you have the conglomerates, largely created out of globalization, etc. You have the megacities, which is a result of tremendous international and intra-country migration and creation of these new cities. So these are two completely new actors in the scene, which may have more in common than countries. That's the argument here, right? Now, let's look at the other side, which is another interesting story, which is that this is, if you like, on the administration, the production side. If you take the megacities in terms of governance and so on, take the large corporations as producers and traders, etc. But what about the consumers? But if you look at the consumers, what you have is, through this urbanization, you actually have the creation of a new consuming class. And in fact, for Asia, what we see is that in 2023, you'll add something like 113 million new people to this consuming class. Okay, now, so we've got these three changes. There are many more, but let me just, these three major changes, which are not, again, we talk about them, we work with cities, we work with communities, we work with individual groups within the middle class and so on. But we don't really, the focus is still on the countries, the focus is still on the policies and so on. And yet here we have a consuming class, which is enormous and is growing rapidly. And the biggest expansion is in Asia. So you're really talking about India with 33 million new members in the middle class in 2023. You've got China with another 30 million. Now 30 million, remember, is bigger than the population of Australia. So these are actually coming into, and they are consumers. And what we are going to tell them is reduce your consumption. Go back to, give up your switch off your air conditioners, go on a bicycle instead of on a motor car and so on. And they're saying, well, we work so hard. We want to live like the American middle class lives. We want to send our children to private schools. We want to go on holidays. We want to, etc. And you are going to now tell this middle class, well, but climate change is there. It's an extinction level threat. And, so again, the political message is not very strong unless we have some way to influence this new consuming class, which is growing. And again, the argument here is that unless we get out of the standard climate injustice kind of approach, and think about where the new coalitions have to be built, it is in these new structural features which have emerged in the scene in the last 20 years. Okay. Now I'm almost there, so please bear with me. Okay, so what happens now? So the key pointers in this reset is, first of all, that climate injustice is only part of the distributional justice as a whole. It's not special. So to push climate action, we should also push the agenda of inequality or reducing inequality, reducing unfairness and so on overall. The second is that the large meetings that we have in COPs and all the rest of it is very good theater, great for raising awareness, but much of that has already happened. The future utility of it is a bit more, bit less than what we often imagine. Okay, so we need to focus on bits of the global picture which has a power to decide. Which are these power to decide agents? And they are the cities, and within cities, in some cases, communities, the global conglomerates, and the consuming class. So we need to rethink politics in a way that we can directly deal with these three new elements. And the way to do that, and then we also need to rethink politics because there are all kinds of new extinction level threats. So you cannot say this is the only threat. If we have nuclear war, it could happen next year. We don't have to wait for another 30 years to do it. Those are immediate threats. A virus, for example, right? So again, where does climate change figure in relation to all these other threats? So if you keep on saying this is the one big threat, and then all these other threats arise, then your argument is diluted in a case. So you need to rethink that in the context of these other. So in the end, we are down to, instead of single action kind of points, to rethink politics in a broader set of coalitions. And in practice, what this means that we need to get away from this black and white kind of picture. That, for instance, if you have petroleum companies, if they invest in renewables, then it must be insincere because they're still getting their money from oil and gas. The two can go together. It could be part of the electric vehicles is another example and so on. So we need to look at the gray instead of the black and white. There's also massive international philanthropy. which is focusing on technical changes, whether you look at work by GIDS and others, which is talking about carbon absorption, which is talking about new forms of energy, with even looking at fusion energy, etc. If we get those, it's much easier to deal, and quantum computers, it's much easier to deal with some of the effects of climate change and maybe reverse it. That is what people are arguing. So you can't just push that out by saying, oh, this is all, these guys are all enemies in a way. What you have to do is to build coalitions across all of these. If you believe that is an extinction level threat, you should be prepared to be part of these coalitions in the same way that you're talking about a common humanity. It's not like you have an enemy there and a friend here and so on. And finally, to explore, if we can, let's say, suppose we had a well-organized climate action agenda between just 5 countries. Let's just take the BRICS. How much of the global 1.5% target could we meet if we just had India, China, Brazil, Indonesia, and South Africa? And I suspect, and this is what my next paper is about, that almost 70 to 80% of the global warming target could be met just by focusing on these 5 countries. And again, that's an argument against this huge jamboree of the COPs. It's an argument in favor of focusing on powers to decide, like the cities and the companies and the communities, etc. And that might be more effective way to go, and also to be a bit more streamlined, a bit more internally consistent when it comes to the philosophical basis of making the argument. So you have a solid philosophical basis, it's integrated in your mainstream politics rather than seeing something on the fringe, and you're building coalitions with parts of the global community which are newcomers but which are very powerful. So I want to stop there. Thank you very much. I'm very, very and I wish you all luck. Please, if you don't have time to comment, write to me. You can be as contrary, as difficult, as confused as maybe parts of this paper is, but I welcome it all because it will help me think clearer and improve the argument. So thank you very, very much.
Please share your email also so that we can.
Yes, yes, I'll do it.
Chair.
Yeah, Sunilji.
I think you need to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shall I, or I think we shall invite discussion first, no?
Yeah.
Now, sir, thank you so very much for delivering this wonderful lecture, very thought-provoking lecture. And I think that, the way you have given the entire perspective for the global constituencies today, I think many of the points you have pointed out here are well deserved to be included in the policy decisions, particularly for the developed nations and how they could do something in a more meaningful way for developing the world's. Very interesting presentation, sir. You have cover all kind of aspects, particularly economics of the climate change, strategies also to look into the detail from the developing and developed country perspective, and particularly that what to be learned and how to go ahead as far as the politics of climate change is concerned, and what to be done particularly in the contemporary time, whether we shall be continuing our engagement in organizing the big events only for creating the awareness. Awareness is enough. We have created enough awareness. Now is the time for proper action, and action will be done once we have very proper framework and which is equitable and properly justified as far as climate justice is concerned. Very interesting lecture. And meantime, Professor Pramod Kumar has shared your 2 wonderful articles to me. I will definitely read them after this lecture today, this Golden Jubilee lecture. This is 6th lecture in the series. I will have my viewpoint at the end. Before that, I would like to invite the discussant of today's lecture, Professor Banktes, for your remarks and viewpoint on the lecture. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Banktes.
Thank you, Professor Sunil Nautiyal ji. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to congratulate the good speaker today. Mishra ji has very, it's a thought-provoking proposition on city level, the new kind of structural changes which are happening at the mega city level, the new features are emerging, the transition economies and, the least developed countries. They are also trying to bridge the development divide. But talking about the conference of parties where negotiations are happening, that is a very strange place. It's a unique place because you have it's a platform where science is meeting the geopolitics and the economics. The science and the geopolitical order and the economics, and all these three sets, they go in a very different direction. It took almost like 30 years to convince the different groups on the existential crisis that yes, climate change is there and it has a large impact and nobody could be immune to the impacts, even though you have money. But it's like sailing in a boat, and if the boat has a hole, so even if you are a rich, you're going to sink, because everybody's sailing in the same boat. So it took almost 30 years of negotiations where we deliberated year after year at the COP last meeting in Dubai. So first of all, Mishra ji talked about the conflicting interests between the different countries and politics of action. There is more attention on proving the impact through a scientific lens. Yes, there is a increase in extreme weather events. There are cyclones and droughts and floods and forest fires happening. But the art, the humanity, the humane angle of action, the justice, that is missing from the climate landscape, the climate, what you call the politics of action, where there is more attention on science and not on the action. The action is very recent, which was rightly said by Mishra ji. The impacts are in fact not matched by the action. If you see the impacts are quite heterogeneous, quite differential. There are more than 200, almost like 200 countries participating in the deliberations. There are small island countries and there are coastal, countries like Bangladesh, and India is also having a large coastline. Then you have least developed countries, then you have G77, then G21. There are different uh, power blocks, and they have conflicting interest, and they have differential uh, vulnerability also, like their vulnerability to change and their resilience is also very different. So how to bring them together is a big challenge. The second issue that he talked about was on climate justice. In fact, it is more of climate injustice when you talk about the impacts. There's a how do you take care of the historical emissions? Historical emissions of the rich countries. They have contributed. They have taken a lot of allotted carbon budget. If you see the Paris Agreement, there was one agreement on the the nationally determined contributions, and we thought that we would limit our emissions so that we do not cross 1.5 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial levels. But if you look at the climate justice paradigm, the literature, it is more of talking about climate justice in a climate unfair world, or maybe talking about justice when there is no climate fairness, there is no equity in allocation of carbon budget. And there are some voluntary carbon markets. If you see the new voluntary carbon markets, in fact, they are contributing more to emissions. The voluntary carbon markets are not actually working in real sense, and they are in fact harming people and the planet. So in his third part of the lecture, Mishra ji talks about the mega cities, cities bigger than countries, and how to connect the cities, how to talk about the tangible actions on a scale which is doable. Because right now, 200 different countries with different conflicting interests trying to raise a lot of hot air, but ultimately it is not improving the people or the planet. The communities are still struggling. So, can we develop a city level dialogue or a new sort of consensus, sort of what you call the cluster, the city level cluster? Or there was some attempt when a mayor level conference was done a few years back. You know, cities mayors were invited and they talked about the city level emissions. Then this concept of circularity came, and this green and what you call the carbon neutral city came up. But with the carbon neutral city, what is happening? A new consumer class that he cautioned, a new urban consumer base is emerging with a very devastating lifestyle, a lifestyle which requires more than 2 planets. If everybody lives like US and Canada, we'd require more than 2 planets. So how do you curb the control the emissions from living standards that we have come to this point, lifestyles, consumer base, very large carbon space? That's why in Glasgow, our Prime Minister gave this Mission Life. Mission Life was primarily talking on sustainable living standards, sustainable life standards. Irrespective of the countries or the cities, can we develop similar sort of protocol which applies to everyone across the board? So the new structural features have emerged, new emission groups have come up, and we need a broader set of coalitions. That was a very innovative propositions. But what is happening, I'll tell you the story about the how you could reinvent the growth. How do you reinvent the growth in a carbon unequal world when everybody is talking about global temperature rise and extreme weather events? They are becoming more evident and devastating, and there is no doubt that the entire world must act immediately to cut emissions. We know that, and we also know that our per capita emission is even below the global average. So the question is, what countries will do what, and when they will, when they will be done, when the world is intentionally unequal. The world is not equal. Cities are almost bigger than the countries. Like I can give you just example of my city, Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh population is 10 times bigger than Australia. And Australia, you see the land size and the emission is much bigger. So, the scale of action which is required is inadequate. The scale of action. And we require a major transformation. We require finances. We require finances for energy transitions, finances for adaptation, finances for mitigation. But if you see the pledges, there was this what do you call the loss and damage fund, and the developed countries, they pledged almost like even less than 10% of what is required today. There was one study I remember. It calculated that we require almost $400 billion every year to take care of the to reduce the vulnerability and to also build upon the adaptation. But where this money is going to come from, and how this money is going to be dispersed, and the World Bank came in. The World Bank said that, okay, we will do an interim sort of, we will be a secretariat to loss and damage fund. But the developing countries, they had the problem with this proposition, that why World Bank should come and take the secretariat. Why can't the loss and damage fund secretariat be developed in Bangladesh or in India? So the whole idea is that the negotiations and the agreements, they are leading nowhere. I mean, they are just creating a lot of hot air. There is some positive on replacement of fossil fuel, but when this will be done, it is again not stated in the COP28 how the transition is going to happen from fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel, and whether this transition is going to be met by the CNG and the petrol. They are only talking about the coal, phasing out of coal. But when this coal is going to be, the coal is largely used in developing countries, and we have not used the entire allotted carbon budget as per the INDC and the Paris Agreement. We are still below the allotted carbon budget. So when we have the large development divide, and when there is a large differences between global north and global south, so can we develop a different set of criteria and a different set of protocol which is more city centric, like city level emissions, city level actions, and why to bring those countries which are, in fact, they are not contributing anything to climate change. In fact, they are offsetting carbon. They are more doing, like forest is there in South Asia, in some countries, even in South America. So first, take the major polluters, not only the cities, but also the industries. Like he gave the example of Apple, how their economy is bigger than the country, or even the fossil fuel like Exxon Mobil and other oil refineries. They're bigger than the country. So I think the whole idea is quite innovative, and it does talk about a new structural arrangements and the new agreement goals to be devised, and how it is to be devised, how the call to transition away from fossil fuel among these cities, the city level emissions are structured so that we know that New York or London or Toronto, their impact is bigger than a country, and they could offset, they could fund more towards the actions, the adaptation funds, the resilience funds, the loss and damage funds. So some of these cities would be basically trying to contribute more on a meaningful manner. So finally, I mean, overall, the idea which was shared by Mishra ji, I mean, it has huge, scope, huge scope. Like instead of 200 countries coming with different conflicting interests and taking nowhere, why can't we have a new city level cluster, which can identify gaps, and the big gap could be how to make operational equity in fossil fuel, transition, fossil fuel transition, and also equity in finance, the quality of finance. How quality of finance, because giving money, but giving concessional non-debt finance, that is important. If you give loan and you are asking that pay when your rupees almost like is devalued and the dollar is almost, it's gaining, and then you have to pay back in 25 years. So the quality of finance is very important. How to develop the adaptation finance between the cities, and who has still the right to use the fossil fuels for development and who has taken up much more than their fair share of carbon budget. So without serving these, I think it will be very difficult to put a fair and just transition to climate. You know? So almost like there is a common consensus that yes, there is an existential crisis, but now we have to make the pledges operational. We have to develop the resiliency, city level resiliency, circular economy, green economy, bioeconomy. Like I remember this ABC framework, active, beautiful, clean. Similarly, green economy, circular economy, and there was one more, the resilient economy at the city level. So overall, I really like the paper, even though I have to read it. I just read the abstract and some introduction, but I think once the framework, the building block is made, the building block of dialogue and the building block of phasing out fossil fuels, building block of transition to cleaner fuels among cities, like green hydrogen, then low carbon inclusive growth, low carbon inclusive growth among cities, like we have city level competition. So can we have similar sort of ranking of cities based upon their overall carbon budget and their allocated space and their used space, carbon space, how much they are contributing and how they could offset. So I guess I would just close my discussion here, and I as a chair to conclude. I think I have done from my part.
इंटरनेट लगा मेरा वाला चल रहा है. Thank you, Dr. Professor Venkatesh Datta, for summarizing this wonderful lectures in a very rigorous and meticulous way. Your insights into the lectures has given very broader dimensions that what to be done as far as climate change related issues are to be discussed, to be taken into considerations. And with regard to Indian perspective, I think urban rural divide is just, this is the very crucial issue which needs to be discussed, researched thoroughly. And as far as household carbon footprints are concerned, I think we don't have very meticulous and sophisticated data on this. We are just making a kind of general assumptions. Then what is the household carbon footprint within the city? The variables are so high that we don't have, we are not in a position to divide that who is emitting at what level and how to confine that emission, so that the poor who are just the victim of the climate change could be given proper incentives. So this is very, very challenging. Meticulous approach is required. Huge resources are required. But dimensions and insight what you have given, in addition to the lecture given by Professor Satish Chandra Misra, are really very interesting. And I'm sure that our scholars who are attending this conference today, this lecture today, will take some of the perspective which are given here through the lecture and by you for their future research as far as climate change debate and research is concerned in our country. North-South divide is very, very high. It's widening day by day. Come what may, we are organizing the events. COPs are going on. Next year, COP also will come. We are discussing the climate change, but divide is going up and up. We want them to follow our lifestyle. Will they agree? Definitely not. Will Americans be ever agree to follow the lifestyle of Indians sitting in Lucknow or in Delhi or in Almora in Himalaya? They will never, and they want us to restrict your development, to keep your aspirations below the level of your satisfaction. Keep and just follow the lifestyle in a way so that you are to be called, tagged as a carbon neutral society. We will never accept this. We have right to develop and we need development. And as Professor Misra has rightly pointed out that need to look into this, there is a time for us to again revisit that what is the historical perspective of entire debate, though this was discussed very, very thoroughly, but need to be discussed further. This time they have given us a kind of, a kind of hope that they are giving us a kind of support in the form of loss and damage fund. And that will be replenished by the developing countries and used by us to respond to the more unavoidable effects of climate change. You see, that look at our landscapes, which are highly vulnerable to climate change, whether the Himalaya or the Eastern Ghats or the Western Ghats, and the amount of impact, negative impact, unprecedented event they are happening nowadays and impacting our society and ecology. Will this loss and damage fund will replenish the loss which are incurred there in the sensitive ecosystems of India due to climate change? Not at all, cannot. I think we need to do something in a more meaningful way, and what to be done, further discussions are to be done. And then what Professor Misra has rightly pointed out, the politics of climate change has to take a kind of new dimension, so that again, we could discuss something which we could have discussed long ago, but unfortunately we did not discuss. What is happening nowadays? Europe, North countries are teaching us. I was really very astonished that I had attended what event recently, academic event that was, and Europe is advocating and teaching us that now you should follow approach for the development under climate uncertainty, to the Indians particularly, and your approach should be ecosystem-based approach. I think they are teaching us what should be the approach for development following the ecosystem-based approach. You see, this is the irony. And what is this ecosystem-based approach? Very integrated management of land, water, and resources around us to promote conservation and sustainable use in a very equitable way. Equity is a great concern nowadays. And to restore, to strengthen self-sustaining capacity of human natural resource ecosystem. I think which is our concept since antiquity. Now they are teaching us in a foreign language, ecosystem-based approach Indians should follow. This is the irony, and we are not able to defend them. That they should follow our approach, which is still today we follow in our forested landscapes and our many parts of our country. Our approach is still ecosystem-based approach, but they are not following. But they want us to follow this approach. Another thing is that when we are talking about equity and equitable share of the resources and equitable justice to the people which are really in an equitable way, means we shall get more share. The developing countries shall get more share. An irony of today's development is that developed nations do not want to compromise on any of the things which is related to their development, aspirations, and luxurious life. For example, Indians are producing every day 0.5 or 0.6 kg of waste, household waste, and Americans is not less than 7 or 8 kg per capita per day. Just think, if Indians would start behaving the way Americans are doing at present, we need 7 planets to absorb that waste. And now the ambitions means they want us to not to produce, not to aim for development, not to become developed, be in isolation, and follow a very kind of lifestyle which is to be tagged with you. We'll give you only one tag, or you are a society which is very, very sensitive towards ecosystems and resources. I think we do not need this tag. Definitely we are here to conserve the resources. Our approach is to conserve the resources, to manage the resources, but our aim is to also become developed through a proper approach, so that our impact, we are not here to do the damage which North countries has made on the ecosystem, but we are here to follow an approach which is very sustainable. So what I would like to say here is that 2 or 3 points I will definitely highlight here. As Professor Misra has pointed out, I do agree that shifting the focus on climate justice from global conferences to local communities and adopting the familiar technologies can promote both climate actions and as well as conservation practices. And this has to be dealt in a proper way. In addition to climate actions, we should prioritize our traditional ecological knowledge and gelling traditional ecological knowledge with modern technological advancement. This is required to empower communities and regional initiatives. So we need technological advancements. I think North countries should give us. And it is very, very important to find practical solutions tailored to specific context. This is important. In addition to what I feel is that the human-centric approach to climate justice movement, ecosystem level studies are very, very important. Such as I will just highlight the things from the perspective of my own discipline, from the ecological science, such as shift in species, environmental needs. I think this is impacting socio-ecology in a very, very negative way. Functional traits, ecosystem structure, socio-ecological interaction of society, living the matrix of forest, functioning and productivity. I think this kind of approaches we need to adopt very broadly. Agriculture, India is still 600 million people depend on agriculture, practice agriculture and allied activities. So agriculture is expected to face major impact from the climate change. I think we are facing, but the impact will be more disastrous if we are not able to reduce the emission and to meet the guidelines which is there to reduce the global warming below the level of 1.5 degree by 2050 and so on and so forth. So localized studies should be conducted to understand the climate resilient and traditional crops. I think we have to have our own approaches as far as climate uncertainty is concerned. And another aspect is that climate change mediated disasters in the form of extreme and unusual climatic events. And they are prominent across the globe and they are impacting the community at very localized scale. What I feel is that do we have a proper systems to predict the impact of climate change in near future? We are still following the global models to predict the climate change. In Himalaya, we have 1 or 2 models predicting the impact of climate change on entire Himalayan region. But localized impact of climate change are much more disastrous. Recently, we had seen what has happened in the Kullu Valley, only in one small valley, but impact was so high that entire socio-ecological system got negatively affected. And we need, I think some studies were saying that we need 20 years to get back to the same system which was there before the disaster. So what I feel is that we need the technology. Therefore, the studies focusing on historical trends such as extreme events and prediction of future scenario. We need to establish effective kind of early warning system at localized state for mitigating the impact of climate change and disaster in future. And long-term ecological monitoring. I think we are not having proper data. Data gaps are everywhere as far as our vulnerable ecosystems are concerned. So I think studies, particularly developed nations, should support the studies on long-term ecological monitoring to understand the impact of climate change. We don't have the data. Long-term data is not available. I think in addition to support the infrastructure, there should be support for conducting in-depth research in the field of climate change. And for this, the developed nations should give enough funding. And well-organized and coordinated studies based on consortium approach. Let the Europe also take part in our study. And we still carry out to generate a comparable and ecological meaningful data for understanding long-term impact of climate change in different ecosystems. And once we have this robust outcome, because climate change is never-ending debate issue. This will be there till the planet Earth exists. So definitely this study today, you will say, okay, what will happen after 5 years? We need immediate relief. But in long run, conducting such a study will make more meaningful impact on the stakeholders for conservation of ecosystems and safeguarding the interest of the local people. And I do agree with both the distinguished experts today, Professor Satish Chandra Misra and Professor Venkatesh Datta. you have highlighted many issues and put thrust on the area which need immediate attention. So humans are, as we know, are major drivers of the land use change in different habitats and ecosystems on the earth. But such changes, this are making our forest fragmented. There's a habitat loss, and development of now concrete infrastructure adversely impact the source of carbon sink, and even a city that the green area is devastating, getting eradicated very fast. So enhancing the emissions from greenhouses in cities and all is quite high. So it is thus important to conduct holistic kind of studies on ongoing land use changes, its impact on existing carbon sinks, and contribution toward climate change. For example, in our country, we need to conduct, and such studies will definitely play a major role, in my opinion, in designing climate change mitigation strategies at national and local stages, and definitely in the interest of international communities. So these are my few observations on what I feel from the perspective of the lecture today. And
Honorable Chair, can we take few questions, maybe 10-15 minutes?
yes, we will definitely invite the questions. And now the floor is open for the discussion.
I welcome my senior colleague, Professor Satyanarayan Sangeeta. Welcome, sir. You're muted.
Thank you for inviting me. I joined little late. The topic is quite interesting. Politics matters a lot. Since I could not hear the lecture, I could not comment anything. Thank you for inviting me. I'm
Thank
very
you.
happy to see you and Professor Nochal. That's a very good. You are doing extremely well. I will come later on whenever there is a future meetings. I will join.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. So let us have questions from the online, if there are any questions. I think we have Shilshika. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, this topic was very, I found this very catchy. Change. No, it would be. I'm a student of political science, and I was recently looking at a series of lectures where they were discussing why, climate change or, climate issues cannot become, why there's no political mobilizations around such issues. And I still am unable to think through. You mentioned that we need to think this perspective of looking at climate change from black and white perspective, yeah, and we should go for gray perspective. But in terms of climate, in terms of action, I feel that everything is gray when it comes to climate change. Nobody, because who's talking about action or who's talking about this whole issue of climate change, and from where that person is talking about becomes very significant. Right, because you have already touched upon this issue of inequity and south differences and things like that. In that sense, when you were talking about resetting this entire politics, from where the action should begin, and you mentioned about, cities dialoguing with each other, I am still very skeptical about, what would come out of that. Because when cities would dialogue with each other, because you said the reason was that they have similar kinds of issues, so the possibility of coming to a consensus would be greater as compared to, nations dialoguing with each other. But firstly, I'm skeptical because, these cities, again, are not at the equal platform, right? We cannot compare the concerns of New Delhi in sense of, climate issues with New York, So there may be certain commonalities, but, the scale, the desire for action and all those, the finance and other things are very, very, very unequal. So how then they are different from, groupings of nations? Firstly, this thing. And then when cities are dialoguing on climate change and climate action, what would they talk about? Because this whole issue of urgency varies across nation, across people, in terms of action. Because everybody is facing this impact of climate change, but whose clock is ticking faster? And the people whose clocks are ticking faster are the vulnerable groups who are probably not within these mega cities. So, unless you have that sense of urgency, or you are able to identify that with that sense of urgency, I think no consensus can come up. And this whole thing of carbon trading, I think this is not, this solution actually keeps aside the urgency, which these smaller countries, vulnerable people, poor people are, facing. So I don't see that, how this will reset the politics of climate change in terms of action.
Okay, good question.
ठीक है बोलो बोलो ठीक है मैं वही है ना ऑनलाइन नहीं है बोलो
Yeah, Manjur, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. First of all, sir, it's a really wonderful presentation. You have raised social justice and climate justice as well into your topic, and I'm from political science background as well, and I found that it's really missing. When we discuss about the economics of it, carbon footprint emissions, basically in terms of economics. But thankfully you have brought it. But I'm stuck to, this is the one comment on your paper, and then I'll have possibilities and challenges of a way forward that we will discuss and you have discussed. The one comment is that my idea stuck to when you say that, and you rightly refute that human is one, it's a myth. And because of differentiation across the globe, within the country, and across the city, we have this differentiation. So it's a myth, and I agree with that. But at the same time, I found that what you are aspiring, or teleologically trying to point out that this is the ideal we have to achieve, rather we are not able to achieve, and that's why you are making a factual critical comment on that idea actually. So, but the point is that if you look at this climate change debate, and I was looking at the Anthropocene epochs and this whole idea, we found that this is the problem actually. Humanity is one, and discussing the humanity from the philosophical point of view as a one itself missing the main point. And what is that main point? And I found that bringing, and this is the bigger crime of so-called modernity and modern thought process and philosophy, that they bring, and we brought human to the center of any idea. Human with capital, it's a central to any idea, and thus it gives us some kind of a superiority to the human race species over the other species existing in the nature. And so we have become superior, we had, and we developed this sense of right, that we have a right to exploit these species and the earth for our development. And in the way, we completely forgot what is happening to the other species. And so we are on the verge of sixth extinction at the moment. So the whole idea of bringing human to the central is itself a problematic idea, I found. And so we need to bring, and human has to act and bring other species into the consideration, into their actions when they are deciding policy or whatever actions for the climate change. That is one thing. The second thing, sir, you talked about, of course, inequality. We should discuss inequality, poverty, and other things. What is the possibility of it? I was trying to figure out while you are, delivering your lecture, and I found that, how do you see this whole challenges? And I see it from the, basically from the capital behavior of capital at the global level, and in the boundary, a particular geographical boundary of a nation. And we have this sense that global capital wants to dominate the global scenario, and the nationals in the nation there has been tendency to have a monopoly capital, and so that they can compete in the global area, and thus they find it is their right to exploit the natural resource within the boundary, and of course the state is helping them. And so we have a across the stakeholders. I found that there are within the state political elite and the economic elite and other elite, they have this consensus of exploiting the our resources for not for the general benefit, but basically to have this monopoly, to develop this monopoly capital, so that they can compete at the global level, because we are now in a global competitions. So Ambani wants to dominate South Africa along with the Chinese capital in that region actually. So what is happening actually, for few on the earth have purpose to exploit the resources of the earth, and for the larger population, it's mere the survival thing. So we have been divided into this very clear cut. I see that some wants to exploit it, and they want to move on to the moon, and this whole moon and Mars process is basically that they knew that this world is going to get over, and we have to settle somewhere else, and such a that multiverses, the idea of multiverse citizenship is coming up. So that's what I find out. So yeah, and while looking at the chairs count, I should not bring it into that, but I find that when you talk about the Indian lifestyles, and Americans will not accept it. But I don't find that Delhi rich brat is going to accept the Kushinagar rural population lifestyle. Within India, there is a huge difference, and Dr. Surin Nautiyal's own study in Isaac say that there has been 300% more the carbon footprint produced by the rich than the poor. So we have a huge gap. So I don't know, sir. You said that let's be confused. So I am confusing maybe all of us, and let's discuss it, sir. Thank you so much.
An alternate model of development.
I think one minute. Can I come in? Let me ask sir to respond these questions, and then we'll request you. And please be brief when you are asking please be brief. What are your doubts, and how these doubts to be cleared by honorable speakers or any one of us?
yes, मेरा सर बहुत सीधा सरल सा है. मैं ग्लोबल से लोकल पे आती हूँ.
Kavita, let us take the second round. Let the speaker first answer this question.
मेरा लास्ट है. आपका भी है? नहीं सर, फिर मैं ही हूँ, फिर ज्यादा लोग नहीं है.
शॉर्ट में बोलिए थोड़ा.
हम जब बात कर रहे हैं क्लाइमेट चेंज के, मुझे ये लगता है कि जैसे आपके उसमें था कि अर्बन इज ए मेजर रीजन ग्रोथ का भी और साथ साथ क्लाइमेट चेंज का भी. बट आजकल जो है, मैं कहूंगी कि रूरल एरिया भी बहुत पीछे नहीं है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल द एग्रीकल्चर, स्पेशली in all over the world or even within India, वो place जो main based on agriculture, the high consumption of pesticides, the basic reason for climate change, particularly in rural area. I think ये मेरा एक कंसर्न था. दूसरा, मुझे कहीं ना कहीं लगता है कि जो सर ने भी बात की थी ट्रेडिशनल इकोसिस्टम की और मॉडर्न इकोसिस्टम की, और इसमें मैं एक बात कहूंगी, लेवल ऑफ एजुकेशन. मुझे लगता है जो अवेयरनेस की बात हो रही है ना, लेवल ऑफ एजुकेशन बढ़ रहा है. वी आर मोर टॉकिंग अबाउट अवेयरनेस नाउ. मुझे लगता है कि छोटे से बच्चों को भी पोल्यूशन पे एक ऐसे लिखना सिखाते हैं. दे आर अवेयर कि क्लाइमेट चेंज हो रहा है, पोल्यूशन हो रहा है और कैसे ठीक करना चाहिए. बट कर ले हम इंडिविजुअल हु इज रेस्पॉन्सिबल. देयर इज अ 4 to 5 क्लास इंडिया में भी और ग्लोबली भी. Within a country also, low income group countries, middle income group countries and higher, or within a society, low income group society, middle income group society. My questions are, who is more responsible for climate change? Or we need the big push. Actually, we are thinking about the big push, पर क्या ज़्यादा जरूरी है? Big push from which side? Higher group or lower group? Not in terms of country, but in terms of society, or the little things. बिकॉज हम उम्मीद करते हैं गवर्नमेंट ये करे, एजेंसी ये करे, बट एज ए इंडिविजुअल, क्योंकि मैं एक छोटा सा एग्जांपल देती हूँ, हमारे गांव में कि हमारे जो बाबा थे, दादा थे, यहाँ पापा लोग थे, वो जानते थे कि ये चीज यूज करेंगे तो मिट्टी का क्या होगा। लेकिन आजकल हम जानते तो हैं, लेकिन उसको ना करने के लिए हमारे पास कोई रीजन नहीं होता है, उसको करने के लिए हम लोगों के पास 1000 रीजन है। बट जितने भी हमने अपने पेरेंट, वो एजुकेट नहीं थे, बट दे आर मच मोर अवेयर इन टर्म्स ऑफ एक्शन
Yeah.
फॉर क्लाइमेट।
Thank you. Yeah.
थैंक यू सर।
Now over to Professor Misra.
Yes, thank you very much. Before I get lost in the lot of very interesting questions, I'll take the ones which I think will illustrate the kind of issues that I've talked about in my paper and see whether I can come round to that. I think the first one, I mean, I accept the comments of the discussants and so on, that there is tremendous amount of inequality in international negotiations. There is a lot of difference of opinion. It's very difficult to come to a broad agreement. And even when the agreements are there, they're not done in good faith. And so financial commitments are made, which are not released. Carbon markets are being used more or less to shift the responsibilities, like throwing your garbage in your poor neighbor's yard and keeping yours clean, and then paying your poor neighbor some money so they clear the garbage. I mean, I understand all that. Before I get on to the specific questions, let me just react a little bit to the very interesting issues brought up by the discussants, and then I'll come to the questions, if you don't mind. I think the first thing which makes life very difficult when we talk about inequality is the fact that industrialization itself, whether it was in the USSR, whether it was in India or elsewhere, was almost this idea of catching up, was itself a response to inequality. All the countries that were colonized or in other way backward used catching up as a way of catching up with who? Catching up with those colonizing powers who had exploited our natural resources and got rich in the process. So we have to catch up to show, to stop that exploitation, but also to show that we can actually achieve this level of technological change and development, that it was not somehow racially determined, that the white people know best and they are cleverer and so on. So the idea that when you look at this industrialization, whether it was through Stalin, whether you talk about central planning elsewhere, parts of Africa, in Latin America and elsewhere, was itself a push for equality. And now, it's considered to be something evil because you've now endangered the planet. So I think a little bit of history here is very important to understand what was being tried at that time. I think now another problem is that if you take the larger countries, especially in Asia, there are a lot of unintended consequences for this high growth. I remember going to China many times and asking them about the China model. And they said, Satish, we don't have a China model. Because do you really think that when we started, we thought we'd grow at 11% or more? Did you really think that we open the window and we can hardly breathe in the Beijing air? Did you really think that our levels of inequality will one day be higher than Brazil's? So there are a whole series of unintended consequences here also. So it's not like you have some evil genie, trying to grow faster and wreck the climate. And, we're dealing with a number of unintended consequences in which we are all experiencing different kinds of setbacks or new generation of tasks, etc. So I'm pleading for getting off the acrimony and the controversy, etc. Because remember, in a global scene, if Poland can become a member of the EU next to Germany, I mean, Poland was totally destroyed, right? Or France, which had been at war with England for 1,000 years, can part in the same, or Stalin can have pact with Hitler. The point is, when you need to, you make friends with people who are traveling in the same direction. So the acrimony about, well, here is an oil and gas company which invests in renewables, so it's got to be fake, etc. I think we need to get past that if we are serious about climate change. Okay. I think the second very important issue that I see in the literature is the notion of trust. The idea of democratic apathy, and at local level, trust disappearing. So it's very difficult to have any logic for collective action. Again, so if you have political parties or action groups which are talking about strengthening local communities, which are talking about equality issues like promoting assistance to the poor, etc., it's not like they are not climate action issues, because they are part of the building blocks that you need to have community level action and climate change and so on. Yeah? So I think that's the point I was making. You have to integrate the broader literature on, whether it's inequality or political mobilization or social trust or whatever it is, as a building block for a sustainable action on the climate front. And that also means that it's easier to have political parties which are not setting the climate change agenda against unemployment or against some other issue. But the question is, those are all building blocks for creating that kind of trust. Now, the thing that I hear is that if there is so much distrust, if people just cannot work together, then of course Bill Gates is the only solution, which is rely on technological change. Suppose you had fusion, cheap fusion energy, you solve the problem. You can take the Sahara and you can have massive forests in the Sahara, right? You can recapture carbon which is released in the atmosphere because you have almost, costless energy, right? You could have so many other kinds of changes. For instance, in the material science, the impact of new kinds of ways of making cement, which will reduce your, just like electric vehicles is. So you rely on technology, and India as a major technological player should then focus on, just like it did with vaccines, focus on the technology. Because human beings are never going to agree on these things because they are very emotional. And so now that is exactly the position that most of the developed countries are taking in private. It's all very well, but in the end, technology has saved us in the past and will save us again. But that's what you come down to. If you push the argument of, that they are different, they're never going to agree, etc., etc., we're going back to the colonial kind of debate. But that's the truth. That's how it is. Okay, now let me try and answer the specific questions that were made. I think the political mobilization question is a very good one. And you're right to ask, why is it that we'll have an agreement on cities which we don't have on countries? Well, a lot of the literature suggests that when two countries talk to each other, they tend to stress their differences. They will say, we have different levels of industrialization, we have different level, our peoples are different religion, we speak a different language, we eat different kinds of food, etc., etc. Because you want to distinguish yourself from the other country. And the idea of the cities is that when you're talking about problems that you're faced with, in a way, they are rather common problems. Transport, for example. Right? The way they do transport could be different, but nobody argues that that is a priority. So it's transport, it's sanitation, and it's climate change, because it's not just true that New York does not feel the pressure of pollution. And now there are all kinds of new pollution. You talk about sound pollution, you talk about your buildings being destroyed because you have so much traffic, etc. So many of the things are actually rather similar, and they also learn from each other, because whether you're designing a metro in Delhi, it's not that different fundamentally from a metro in New York, or a metro in Washington, or a metro in Jakarta. So in a way, you're focusing on many things which are similar, and that helps you build communication in a much better way. You're also similar in the terms of the amount of national GDP you actually generate. Some of the large cities can generate 70, 80% of their GDP. So the impact they have in terms of the reduction of carbon,
emission.
greenhouse gases and so on, is quite immense. So they're good examples in that sense, And plus, there are all sorts of new cities being created. So if you have good examples and pilots in the bigger cities, then they're often followed by the smaller ones. Now, of course, there are differences. Chandigarh is not the same thing as Bombay. But at the same time, increasingly, there is more similarity than there are differences between countries. So that is one of the arguments. I won't go to the question of whose clocks are ticking faster and so on, because in a way, if you are not very hopeful about agreement, then all our clocks, and it doesn't really matter whose clocks are ticking faster or not, right? Because it's not like only New York will have high temperature and everybody else will have lower and so on. So I think that's okay. The social justice issue and humans and species. I think the reason we're talking about political action here, right? And I'm not aware of any non-human species which is involved in political action. So it comes really from our side what we think is just or unjust and so on and so on, right? And I think that it's very difficult to convince anybody to talk about justice for non-humans if you don't have justice for humans. Whether there is no platform I know that you'll be able to say there's sanctity for life and all life is the same. So we have a long way to go before that. So now, okay, the inequality challenge. Yeah, that's a very good one. When you're talking about global capital and national capital and monopoly and so on. I think one of the things that we notice about the emergence of global corporations, capital, whatever, is that they're not national. There is very little national loyalty when it comes to large corporations. They truly are completely international. And now they have a mobile international skilled labor force, which also has joined that kind of supranational way of thinking, right? So the time is gone when Henry Ford was, clearly an American, or Vanderbilt, or Carnegie, or whatever, the first generation. Now, Tata has no problem investing in Vietnam. We have lots of poor here. But the Tata Motors has a $3 billion investment in and Tata Steel or Adani or whoever it is. So I think we are now talking about a new generation of plutocrats. Now, what you're seeing in the generation of plutocrats, if you look at the economic inequality data, is that, let's say, over the last 10 years or so, even post-COVID in the recovery, right? It's the top 1% and even less, which has become much richer, even among the billionaires and the millionaires. There's a concentration under few global enterprises, right? So it's not like you've got the billionaires and everybody else. The billionaires are also getting squeezed more and more and more. And what they're doing, something interesting, is that now many of them becoming philanthropists. You would have thought that Bill Gates and all the rest would be giving literally billions of dollars to international causes, whether it is malaria eradication or whatever. There's no generation in the past which did that, right? So again, these are global thinkers who, are wearing different hats. And again, my argument about focusing on the grays is that don't ignore them just because it's Bill Gates, because you also look at what their foundations are doing, et cetera, and work with the foundations if you have to. So I think that's part of the answer. As far as exploiting resources for their own benefit is concerned, it's a sad story. But so much of the literature from Africa, much of the literature shows that it's the very poor who have also degraded the environment. They have overfarmed, they've overused livestock as a way to survive. So it's not like the rich are saying, okay, we don't care about the resources. It's the very poor also who don't have a choice. The motivation is different, but the impact is quite significant, right? So I think, again, the gray becomes closer to the truth here. And that's what I mean there. And same with the use of pesticides. Why do you use pesticides? Because many of the traditional varieties are no longer in demand. The new varieties require much higher productivity. The sales has to be done with, the size of the grains has to be they may not be broken, and the whole. So it's not only the guy who is producing who is actually using the pesticide, is the seller, is the marketer,
Yeah.
is the whole. So again, it's not just the farmers, it's a whole industry of traders and shippers and so on, So again, it's a great story rather than. Now, come back to the old generations. Okay, very interesting, because in India, we always think that. We always have our grandfather or father or uncle or somebody who has come from the village. As a country, we are literally second generation, or sometimes even first generation urban dwellers. And why did we do that? Because there was a lot which was very oppressive about traditional society, especially on women, for example. And why is it that in Southeast Asia, the largest and the most dramatic change that has taken place in the rural societies is the movement of women to urban markets, to get away from that family control, etc. So even there, you have a gray, which is saying, yes, my grandmother used to do, use local resources better and could manage with less, but the granddaughter wants to go and work or study in a university, and So again, the gray becomes more closer to reality than our ideal picture that we think of. My last thing, I'm sorry to have spoken so long, I really apologize, is that local against global. Now, if a political party has an agenda, let's say, which is focusing on building trust in local societies, it's a social capital agenda, right? If I'm a climate activist, I would think these political agendas are very close to mine, even though they're not talking about greening. Okay, why? Because they're building structures which are important to do what I want to do, which is to have local action in climate change. Okay? And it's the trust between the society that becomes important. Because if there is trust, then once you insert the agenda of climate change and action, then that is likely to result in some change, as opposed to when they don't. So again, you build coalitions, not only with somebody who says green or who is going to chain themselves against a wall and so on, all of which is very good for awareness, but you won't get much action. So a lot of people, if you're talking about political parties which are focusing on social justice or reduction of poverty, political movements which are looking at social capital, they're all friends of the climate change agenda, climate action agenda, not because they say go green, which they do anyway, but because they're building vehicles, if you will, which help move the climate agenda. So that's what I'm trying to say with this. It's not just it is not just to criticize the literature that there are lots of different democracies, and we know that, but it's not actually said in the climate change literature. What is new about the way I'm looking at it is to connect this material, which is very rich, which exists, which all of us as social scientists have been brought up on, and saying, okay, how does that relate to climate action? Rather than only focusing on climate change material and then saying how to improve it, etc., which we need to do. So I'd like to stop there. And I can't thank you enough, because this is, there's some very difficult questions here. And it's a great response. And, I'm very grateful to Dr. Pramod and you. I hope that you will come to Bali. I'm in the process of establishing something new in Bali called the Arthashastra Institute. The main aim of that is to bring Indonesia and India closer together, and in lots of common agendas, and one of them is the climate change agenda. Thank you very much, sir. I'm very grateful.
सर म्यूट कर लीजिए.
Dr. Shivshika will propose the
Sorry.
vote of thanks.
Thank you, Mishra ji, for coming all the way and giving so much time. And very burning topic, very relevant topic. I'll speak, but I'll just ask my chair Honorable Chair to just conclude
No, yeah,
for the
thank
vote
you.
of thanks. Okay. Yes, Sunilji.
Yeah, so I really.
Shivshikar, let the chair conclude
Yeah.
first.
Thank you, Professor Misra sir, for once again, I congratulate you for giving this thought-provoking lecture. I think many new ideas are emerged. I have jotted down some of the ideas for my research to develop consortium-based project for understanding the impacts of climate change on Himalayan landscape, which is highly vulnerable. And I will definitely approach the international agencies to support consortium-based research rather than just giving fund for infrastructure. And there we don't need much fund for infrastructure, but I think research studies are to be supported by North countries. And the questions, I'm really happy that the way our young scholars from GIDS has raised the questions in a very detailed manner.
Great.
It shows that they are in very, very good hands under the leadership of Professor Pramod Kumar. I compliment the scholars the way they have detailed understanding, in-depth understanding on the climate change, its consequences and complexities of human and ecosystem interactions under climate uncertainties and unprecedented things happening due to aggravated impact of climate change is very much praiseworthy. I compliment our young scholars from GIDS. And Professor Pramod Kumar, I'm really overwhelmed to see and glad to see our respected Professor Satyanarayan Sangeeta, sir. Sir, so good to see you virtually though. And I remember your support, your encouragement, and your affection towards us during your time in ISEC. One of the most respected professor in Institute for Sociological Change was Professor Satyanarayan Sangeeta. Sir, so good to see you, and thank you so much for joining us today and listening to Professor Misra Sahab. And I congratulate my dear friend Professor Venkatesh Datta, who had elaborated upon the lecture in a very scientific manner and very meticulous manner, and given very new insights also, taking something very interesting out from this thought-provoking lecture and putting in front of all of us so that we can also think in a detailed way so that what could be done in addition to the climate politics which is going on all over the countries. But what India needs to do, I think our country is quite clear that what to be done. To be very honest, our country is in the forefront of mitigating the disastrous impact of climate change. Our aim is by India, in India, and for rest of the world. That is our approach. And we are doing this not only for our country, but the way we are supporting the people in Africa, people in Afghanistan, on the developmental project in a very sustained manner. This is very much praiseworthy. Our commitments in front of international constituencies are well appraised by all over all over in all the countries by the political leaders, that India, despite of its natural resource-based dependent society, India is committed to create additional carbon sink worth of 3 gigaton of CO2 equivalent by 2030. I think we are achieving this. I'm so glad to know that the way our carbon sinks are increasing, the way we are restoring the ecosystem, the way we are contributing towards reducing the anthropogenic pressure on existing resources, our technological advancement, our people-friendly technologies all across the regions, in all the isolated pockets, are well diffused, and we must appreciate our large stakeholders, the way they are contributing and supporting. Also, support from Government of India towards R&D is very much encouraging. We all are very much encouraged to do work on this issue and to do something in a very meaningful way for reducing the impacts of the climate particularly in our country as a whole. But we are much more focused to do something more meticulously in the vulnerable ecosystems of our country, the Himalaya and the Eastern Ghats and the Western Ghats. If Himalaya is not there, for example, Himalaya will be definitely there, but hypothetically, India would have been more than a deserted nation. So we need to do something more meaningful way. And Professor Pramod Kumar, I'm very happy to mention here is that our institute is doing work on spring sets all across the Indian Himalayan region. There are 3.5 million springs all across the Himalayan region, and you are very much aware because you have worked very extensively in central Himalaya also. Our fast-flowing rivers which are originated from the glaciers, are not at all sustaining the society and helping the society for their socioeconomic development. It's the spring which provide the mainstay of the local society for their socio-economic development and ecological integrity. So our aim, but many 50% springs all across the Himalaya are drying up, to be very honest, due to disaster impact of climate change. And our institute has taken this task up, and we are rejuvenating the springs all across the Himalayan region. We have geotagged more than 20,000 springs all across the Himalayan region, and we are bringing them back. They started flowing back, and many of them was once completely drained out. So we have done many interventions through proper scientific and technological perspective, so that springs are coming back and society is happy, our biodiversity is rejuvenating. So these are the works which our institute is doing. I'm sure, and we all know many other institutions are working in a similar fashions in our sensitive ecosystems in Eastern Ghats and Western Ghats. Dry landscapes, I think this also needs immediate attention. Our dry and semi-arid and arid landscapes. In semi-arid and arid landscapes, the society is still dependent on our animal husbandry, and they depend on animal husbandry effect upon the pastures. Pastures are getting eradicated day by day due to variety of factors. So pasture rejuvenation programs should be prioritized so that our local economy could be sustained in longer run. So there are many issues which need immediate attention, and for that, I think the time has come that all disciplines should come together to form the projects in the consortium mode. There is no time to work in isolation. Vertical development, vertical growth is not at all required in contemporary world, in Anthropocene, and we have to grow horizontally while integrating the disciplines together so that complexity of human and ecosystem interaction under climate uncertainty could be addressed in more meaningful way. So with this final remark, I would like to thank once again, though there is a formal vote of thanks, but Professor Misra sir, आप तो गुरुजी हैं और गुरुजी ने आज हमें गुरु ज्ञान दिया, उसके लिए हम आपका बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करते हैं. इट्स सो ग्लैड टू सी कि हमारे बीच ऐसे वन ऑफ द फील्ड्स हैं जो इतना हमें सिखाते हैं. और जिस तरह से सर आपने टाइम दिया, मतलब 4 बजे से अब 6:30 होने वाला है, और जिस तरह से आपने क्वेश्चंस को हमारे यंग जनरेशन को समझाया, हमें समझाया, आई रियली owe it, and thank you so very much, sir. We are deeply obliged today with your gracious presence, and you are the storehouse of knowledge of the climate field, and definitely I would like to welcome you. I would like to welcome you to my institute, the National Institute of Himalayan Environment, to Almora. Very soon, I will definitely request you to please visit us for a couple of days, and you stay with us, and I will ask my scientists to interact with you so that we can develop some interesting project to solve the problem related to climate change in days, months, or futures to come. Thank you so very much, sir. Over to you, Professor Pramod Kumar.
एक चीज कुछ कह सकते हैं. पहले तो ये है कि क्लाइमेट चेंज में पे काम करने का इसे ये लगता है कि कोई यहाँ पे गुरु नहीं है. हम लोग, हर आदमी जो है वो एक अंधेरी गली में भटक रहा है, और कभी कभी किसी से मुलाकात हो जाती है, बात हो जाती है, तो उससे लगता है कि असली पता कहाँ पे है. हो सकता है उस गलत गली में है, किसी दूसरे गली में चलना है, पीछे जाना है. ये हमारा जो है सो अपना तजुर्बा है. और दूसरी बात यह है कि क्लाइमेट चेंज के बारे में हम कुछ नहीं जानते. कि जितना आप काम देख रहे हैं वो पिछले 3 महीने का काम है, और वो भी इसलिए कि हमारे कुछ दोस्तों ने कहा कि साहब आप बाली में आराम से बैठे हुए हैं और बीच पे जाते हैं और स्विमिंग पूल में अपनी तो आपने जो है सो अखाड़ा बना दिया है, इसलिए कुछ तो करिए. तो जब ये बात उठी तो हमने बिल्कुल एक स्टूडेंट की तरह शुरू किया, और ये हमारा पहला जो है एक तरह से सजी. तो कुछ हमने सीखा, और जो हमने सीखा वो आपके साथ हम बांट रहे हैं. तो उसके लिए हम बहुत बहुत आभारी हैं। दूसरी एक चीज कहना चाहूंगा कि बाली बड़ी अच्छी जगह है। हम लोगों का एक कॉन्फ्रेंस होना चाहिए बाली, और इंडोनेशिया क्लाइमेट चेंज में बहुत बड़ा प्लेयर है, क्योंकि ब्राजील के बाद कोई प्रोटेस्ट कर रहा है, इसलिए हम जल्दी खत्म करेंगे। कि बाली में एक कॉन्फ्रेंस होना चाहिए। इंडोनेशिया दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा आर्किपेलागो है, और हम लोग कोशिश, उसमें भी क्लाइमेट चेंज के बारे में अलग तरह से सोचा जाता है। एक तो फॉरेस्ट्री और दूसरा मैरीटाइम रिसोर्सेज वगैरह, सो यू गेट डिफरेंट। तो बाली आइए। और तीसरी चीज मैं कहना चाहूंगा कि लगता है कि इस साल के बाद और इस साल से हम बाली से भारत आया करेंगे कम से कम 4 या 5 बार, और उम्मीद है कि फिर से हम लोगों की मुलाकात होगी। और आप हमको ईमेल भेजिए और उसका हम फौरन जवाब देंगे, और उम्मीद है कि हम लोग एक साथ कुछ नई चीज सीख सकते हैं। उसके लिए हम बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद हैं। और डॉक्टर प्रमोद को तो हम क्या कहें, इतनी कम समय में इतना आपने ऑर्गेनाइज किया, और ये आपकी संस्था देख के हम कितने खुश हैं, क्योंकि हम 74 में यहाँ पे आए थे, 74-75 में। तो सोच लीजिए आपके, अब तो गोल्डन जुबली हो रही है, हम आपके जन्मदिन में यहाँ, तो उससे ज्यादा अच्छा क्या हो सकता है।
But we need to work on this issue. I think it's a very serious issue, and something new has emerged. The cities working together to fight with climate change, villages working together, agriculture working together with industry. I think this is the message which has come out from this lecture. And गागर में सागर है ये, कि हम सिर्फ एक वीक के अंदर हमने ये ऑर्गेनाइज किया है, और हमको पता नहीं था। मैं संगीता जी, आई एम सिटिंग इन आइजैक ऑर्गेनाइजिंग दिस इन GIDS लखनऊ। सो वर्ड इज स्मॉल, क्लाइमेट चेंज जो है वो, जो टेक्नोलॉजी है उसी का इम्पैक्ट क्लाइमेट चेंज है। टेक्नोलॉजी हैज गिवन अस पॉजिटिव, इट हैज गिवन अस नेगेटिव्स आल्सो, बट वी हैव टू रिड्यूस नेगेटिव, वी हैव टू कॉल आउट मच मोर पॉजिटिव फ्रॉम out of the technology. So we conclude this. I think it is already 6:15. So I now request my colleague Shilpshika to propose the vote of thanks.
Nothing much has been left for me to speak, but still, I really thank the main speaker, Satish Mishra ji, for giving not only a thought-provoking lecture, but also I'm a special thanks for him for coming in person, and also, articulating politics in a very optimistic and positive manner, which, is very rare these days. I thank the chairperson Sunil Nautiyal ji and the discussant Venkatesh Datta ji for broadening the canvas of discussion, bringing in more issues, and also, the enthusiasm with which the chairperson and also the discussant, articulated their viewpoint. It's commendable. I think we stayed for a little longer, but we enjoyed, all of us enjoyed quite a lot. I thank all the online participants and all the people in this room. Thank you very much.
सर, अगर बाली तक नहीं आ पाइएगा तो क्लाइमेट चेंज फ्यूचर का कोई चांस नहीं।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
पहले बाली आइए,
जरूर सर,
बैठ के बात करेंगे, और वहाँ पे बहुत से लोग हैं जिनका तजुर्बा और तरीके का है।
इधर एक फोटो ले लेना, सब
और
आ जाएंगे।
इससे हम लोग शुरुआत करते हैं।
जरूर सर। And now I formally close this session and thank you so very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, sir.